Welcome to today's deep dive. Imagine spending, I don't know, millions of dollars over years to build a really trusted, authoritative brand online. You've got airtight marketing copy, perfectly crafted landing pages, and a legal team that reviews literally every major claim.
Right, the absolute gold standard.
Yeah. But then an artificial intelligence just reads your website. It extracts a single outdated sentence from some obscure blog post, strips away all the surrounding context, and then presents it as absolute truth to millions of users.
Oh, wow.
And you don't even get the click. You don't get the traffic. You just get the liability.
Exactly, yeah.
So today we're looking at this tectonic shift in how information moves across the internet. We are leaving the era of traditional search, where you get a list of links and explore them yourself, and moving headfirst into the era of answer engine optimization, or AEO.
Which is huge.
It really is. AI engines are now synthesizing definitive answers for users, and our mission today is to explore the survival manual for this new landscape. We're diving into a fascinating guide called AEO Governance, Protecting Brand Reputation in AI Answers.
And it's a critical shift because the fundamental architecture of internet traffic is changing. The central tension in these sources is how a brand can maintain control when they literally no longer own the environment where their information is consumed.
Right.
Like in the old search model, a user clicked a link and arrived at your digital property. They saw the publication date on your article. They could, scroll down to read the legal disclaimers in the footer, and they absorbed your brand's whole aesthetic.
Yeah, they were in your house.
Exactly. But an answer engine doesn't do that. It digests your content and regurgitates the synthesized nugget. So the authors of the guide argue that to survive this, organizations have to undergo a total mindset shift. The core thesis here is governance is a growth feature, not bureaucracy.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that is a phrase that completely inverts how most companies operate. Usually when we hear words like governance, compliance, or approvals, we think of the brakes on a car.
Oh, for sure. The stuff that slows the marketing team down.
Right. But the argument here is that in an AEO world, those brakes are actually what allow a brand to drive at 100 miles an hour without, flying off a cliff.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
But to understand how to fix the problem, we first have to understand the mechanics of the threat. The sources use a very vivid term for this, the blast radius. So why does AEO create this entirely different blast radius compared to the old SEO playbook?
Well, in traditional SEO, damage was inherently contained by user behavior, right?
Yeah.
If you had a weak, poorly updated page on your site, maybe a few dozen people clicked it, realized the interface looked old or the information was stale, and they just hit the back button.
Yeah, the bounce rate protected you.
Exactly. The friction of the click protected you. But the guide points out that in the AEO era, answers travel faster than clicks. An answer engine, whether that's a chat bot or like an AI overview built right into a search bar, can scrape that one bad sentence and instantly inject it into countless personalized, translated responses for users globally.
Wow.
Yeah, the friction's gone. A single vulnerability scales instantly.
And that vulnerability isn't just about having the wrong price listed on a product, right? The guide breaks this blast radius down into several hidden risk categories that just sneak up on brands.
Yeah, there are 5 main ones. The most obvious risk is pure accuracy. So, stale numbers, deprecated product features, or an old recommendation getting scraped and presented as your current stance.
Which is bad enough.
Right. But the far more insidious risk is what the guide calls context. It's not just about the AI getting a fact wrong. The danger is when the AI gets it technically right, but applies it entirely wrong because the nuance was lost in the summary.
Do they give an example of that?
Yeah, think of a hardware store publishing a blog post about a heavy-duty bathroom cleaning. They write, use undiluted bleach to clean everything. Within the context of a bathroom tile guide, that statement is true and helpful.
Okay.
But an AI comes along, scrapes that declarative sentence, and later, when a user asks how to clean their hardwood floors, the answer engine synthesizes the hardware store's advice and tells the user to pour pure bleach on their oak living room floor.
Oh, no.
Exactly. The statement was accurate, but the context was stripped, turning a helpful tip into a massive liability.
Wow, that immediately bleeds into the brand risk, doesn't it? Because marketing teams, they love their superlatives. We offer the fastest service or the ultimate solution for your business.
Oh yeah, they live for that stuff.
But if an AI takes that marketing fluff and presents it to a user as literal mechanical guidance without any conditions, you're suddenly making promises you never intended to keep. The AI doesn't understand hyperbole, it just parses the text.
Right, and passes it along.
Yeah.
Which leads to the legal and regulatory risks. If you operate in finance or healthcare, your claims are legally bound to specific disclaimers.
Right, the fine print.
Yeah. If the AI summarizes your financial product and drops the warning about market volatility, you are suddenly making regulated claims out in the wild without any compliance shield.
That sounds like a nightmare for a legal team.
It is. And the final piece of the blast radius is security and privacy. This happens when companies inadvertently publish overly detailed internal methods, maybe in a developer forum or an engineering blog, that an answer engine then surfaces when a malicious actor asks a probing question about system architecture.
Ah, so it just hands them the keys.
Basically, yeah. When you look at all these risks together, it becomes clear that publishing vague, unbounded, or overly aggressive content is no longer just bad practice, it's actively dangerous to the brand.
It's almost like playing a game of telephone, but on a global megaphone. You whisper something nuanced on your blog, the AI passes it along, and by the time it reaches the end user, the message is distorted, missing disclaimers, and amplified to millions.
That's a perfect analogy.
So what does this all mean for brands that are used to shouting the loudest to get attention? I mean, in the SEO era, the louder and more prolific you were, the higher you ranked.
What's fascinating here is that the paradigm of winning has completely flipped. The brands that win answer engine optimization aren't the loudest anymore. The winners are the ones whose content is the most reusable without risk.
Reusable without risk. Interesting.
Yeah, because answer engines are designed by their creators to avoid generating harmful, false, or overly risky answers. They actively seek out content that is safe to cite.
So the goal is to become the safest, clearest, most reference-worthy source.
Exactly. And to achieve that, the guide introduces a writing framework called the safe answer pattern.
Right, the safe answer pattern. It's a very simple three-part structure: claim, boundary, next step. You state the helpful information, you explicitly define the boundaries of when that information applies, and you tell the user what to do next.
Let's try to build one right now.
Okay, say I'm a software company. The claim could be, our software integrates with all major CRM platforms.
Good. Now the boundary.
The boundary would be, this works seamlessly for cloud-based CRMs, but on-premise solutions require a custom API.
Perfect.
And the next step, contact our development team to scope your on-premise setup.
That is a flawless execution of the pattern. You didn't just make a blanket statement, you built guardrails directly into the sentence architecture.
It makes a lot of sense when you broke it down like that.
It does. And the guide highlights specific absolute terms that writers need to eliminate from their vocabulary to make this work. Always needs to become usually. Never becomes in most cases.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you have a phrase like guaranteed, you soften it to a good rule of thumb. And sweeping statements like everyone should are replaced with bounded language. Like if your situation is X, you should.
I can already hear the collective groan from marketing departments everywhere. I mean, I have to push back on this on their behalf. Doesn't adding all these boundaries and exceptions make a brand sound unsure of itself?
It definitely feels that way at first.
Right, because marketers are trained to say the best option is our product, full stop. They want to project confidence and absolute authority. Telling them to swap guaranteed for a good rule of thumb sounds like you're actively watering down the pitch.
Yeah, I get that.
Why would a company voluntarily sound weaker?
It is a totally counterintuitive approach for traditional marketing, but it comes down to understanding the algorithmic mechanism of trust. Remember how large language models work. They are heavily penalized by their developers and by users when they hallucinate or give dangerous advice. Okay. Consequently, their safety filters look for nuance. If your content is full of absolute unbounded superlatives like, this software is guaranteed to double your revenue overnight, the AI's filters will likely bypass your content entirely.
Because it looks like spam.
Exactly. It reads as unverified hype or a potential liability. It's just too risky for the AI to ingest and repeat. By providing the boundary, you are signaling to the algorithmic safety filters, this is a nuanced, trustworthy, and safely bounded piece of information.
Ah, so by acting like the responsible adult in the room, the AI trusts you more, making you more citable.
Precisely.
But wait, if every single sentence across an entire corporate website needs these careful boundaries, guardrails, and compliance checks, content creation is going to grind to an absolute halt. You can't run a modern digital strategy if every blog post is taking 3 weeks to get through legal.
No, you'd be paralyzed.
So how do organizations actually manage this workload without paralyzing their teams?
They manage it by dropping the idea that all content is created equal. The source introduces what it calls the minimum viable governance system. The underlying principle is to apply proportional friction. You only apply slow approval processes to high-risk content.
Okay, that sounds manageable.
Yeah, the guide breaks organizational content down into 3 distinct classifications to keep the publishing pipeline moving.
Let's look at those classifications, because this is where the corporate jargon meets reality. First, you have low-risk content. These are your glossary definitions, general industry education, or, basic non-sensitive how-to guides.
Right.
For this, the system suggests the approval path is just a writer, an editor, and a standard SEO checklist. You publish it quickly, and it only requires a quarterly review to make sure it hasn't gone stale.
Exactly. Moving up the scale, you have medium-risk content. This involves product comparisons, pricing ranges, recommendations, and performance claims.
Things where money is involved.
Yep. Because there is a bit more financial or brand reputation on the line, this requires the editor plus a subject matter expert, someone who deeply knows the product, to review the boundaries before it goes live. The update cadence also speeds up to monthly or quarterly, depending on how frequently the market shifts.
Makes sense. Finally, we hit high-risk content. We're talking about regulated industries, safety-critical information, or specific legal, medical, and financial guidance.
The serious stuff.
Yeah, this is where you bring in the heavy machinery, an editor, the subject matter expert, and a formal compliance or legal review. This content needs to be audited at least monthly, and crucially, it requires an emergency update protocol, so you can push changes live within hours if, say, a federal regulation suddenly shifts.
And running parallel to these 3 tiers is a concept the guide calls truth maintenance.
Truth maintenance.
Yeah, in order to keep facts straight across hundreds of pages, you need a single source of truth. Think of an internal master document that powers multiple public-facing pages. And the text emphasizes a critical psychological component here. Every content cluster must have a specific named person owning it, not a vague department.
Why is that?
Because when a nebulous team owns a page, the bystander effect takes over. Everyone assumes someone else is verifying the facts. When a named individual is responsible for a specific cluster of truths, the information stays accurate.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it's essentially corporate speak for stop sending a dictionary definition to the legal department.
Yes.
It reminds me of airport security. You don't call in the bomb squad to investigate a forgotten water bottle at the TSA checkpoint. You have different levels of screening depending on the assessed threat level of the object.
That's a great comparison.
Because if you treat a blog post explaining industry acronyms with the same security protocols as an annual financial disclosure document, the entire airport shuts down. Your publishing velocity just drops to 0.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that proportionality is the only way AEO programs survive. The guide points out a very common pitfall here. Organizations that insist on a one-size-fits-all approval process lose out to faster competitors.
Because they're just too slow.
Exactly. If your low-risk educational content takes 3 weeks to publish because it's waiting on legal review, your competitors who tiered their governance are going to dominate the AI answers simply because they're feeding the engines fresh, safely bounded truth at a much faster rate.
So we've got the writing pattern to make the content safe, and we have the tiered governance to keep the content flowing. But the source issues a strong warning that even with these systems in place, risk will still find a way in.
Always.
Let's talk about the sneaky backdoors, the hidden vulnerabilities that blindside brands even when they think they're doing everything right.
Well, the most prevalent backdoor is what the authors refer to as page hygiene. One of the biggest AEO risks is that an AI engine might bypass your beautiful, newly governed content and instead select a weak legacy page to represent your brand simply because that page still exists on your server.
It's the digital equivalent of an old brochure from 2018 sitting in a waiting room somewhere. No one internally remembers it exists, but an AI bot crawls the site, finds that old FAQ page, and uses it to answer a query about your current pricing model.
Which is terrifying.
Right, so how does the guide suggest cleaning that up?
It recommends creating a representative page list. You deliberately identify the top 25 flagship pages that you want to promote and strengthen, making them the obvious authoritative references for the AI. But equally important, you identify the top 25 pages to suppress. You either consolidate duplicate pages or use noindex tags. For anyone not deep in the technical side of SEO, a noindex tag is just a piece of code on your page that explicitly tells search engine bots, do not read this, do not save this, do not use this in your index. You have to actively prune the dead weight.
Another massive backdoor the text flags is AI-assisted content,
Right.
which is, the irony of the whole situation. We're using AI to create content for AI to read.
It's wild.
The guide acknowledges that AI is excellent for drafting outlines, rewriting clunky paragraphs for clarity, or summarizing internal notes, but humans absolutely must own the truth. A human has to verify the factual accuracy, apply the boundaries, and review the final claims.
If you skip that human review, you risk creating an endless loop of bad data. Imagine an internal writer uses an AI to draft a post about a new product feature. The AI hallucinates the specific performance metric, say it claims the product works 50% faster when the real number is like 15%. Yeah, if that gets published without a human catching it, that hallucinated 50% is now out in the wild. Other AI engines scrape your site, ingest that false number as a verified fact, and start repeating it to users. You've just poisoned your own well.
And speaking of data points out in the wild, the text highlights a highly specific vulnerability that most companies just completely overlook: interactive tools. Calculators, product selectors, diagnostic quizzes. These are a special risk zone because users interact with them dynamically to generate personalized answers.
The governance checklist for these tools needs to be incredibly rigorous. Does the calculator clearly explain the mathematical assumptions it's making? Does it show boundaries, like a disclaimer stating results will vary when market conditions change?
Right.
Crucially, does it avoid collecting sensitive personal data, and does it provide a clear pathway for the user to understand the limitations of the output?
The guide introduces a fantastic stress test for this, called the screenshot rule. Imagine I'm on a bank's website using an affordability calculator. I punch in my salary, and the tool spits out a giant green number saying I qualify for a $500,000 mortgage.
Okay.
If I take a screenshot of just that final output and text to my partner, or post it on social media, or even feed that image into another AI prompt, is that single image defensible on its own?
That's a brilliant test. It forces you to look at the visual architecture of your tools. If that screenshot gets shared, it needs to have the boundaries baked right into the visual output. It cannot project misleading confidence.
So no floating green numbers without context.
Exactly. There needs to be a visible assumption box or a clear limitation statement captured within the frame of the final result. Furthermore, if the calculator is running on an outdated interest rate, there has to be an emergency pathway to correct it immediately. A single bad number in a calculator, left uncorrected, becomes thousands of cited misstatements as users run their own scenarios.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground today. We've mapped the blast radius, explored the safe answer pattern, broken down the tiered governance, and checked the back doors. But how do you actually measure this transition?
That's the million-dollar question.
The guide provides a very concrete 100-point metric called the AEO Risk Score. Let's break down what actually goes into that score, because if you're auditing your site, you need to know what to look for.
Yeah, so the 100 points are divided equally into 4 buckets, each worth 25 points. The first bucket measures accuracy controls. This asks, are your core numbers verified? Do you have clear, named human owners for the content clusters? Is there a documented cadence for updating facts? If yes, you are in those 25 points.
Okay, the second bucket looks at boundary clarity. This is checking for that explicit safe answer language we discussed earlier. Does the text clearly state best when, changes when, or avoid when? Are the guardrails visible to the AI parsing the text? That's another 25 points.
The third bucket evaluates compliance fit. Do you have the proper legal and regulatory disclaimers attached to the content? Was the tiered approval path actually followed based on the risk level? Are you ensuring no regulated claims are floating around without review? Another 25 points right there.
And the final bucket is page hygiene. Are your canonical links correct? For anyone wondering, a canonical link is basically a signal telling the AI, out of these 5 similar pages on our site, this specific one is the master copy.
Right.
Have you suppressed the junk pages? Have you actively strengthened the top flagship pages? That is the final 25 points.
And when you add all that up, the guide sets specific benchmarks. A score of 70 is acceptable. A score of 85 means you're safe to start scaling your content operations. And a 90 or above means your brand is reference grade and highly defensible against AI summarization.
It takes something that usually feels subjective, like brand safety, and turns it into an objective, measurable framework. You aren't just guessing if your content is safe, you're scoring it against the structural criteria that answer engines actually use to evaluate authority. But if you are sitting at your desk right now, looking at thousands of pages on your company's website, where is the very first place you should start? because applying a 100-point audit to an entire enterprise site all at once is just impossible.
Oh, totally impossible. This raises an important question, and the guide is very practical about it. It provides an action checklist to prevent paralysis. You do not tackle the whole site at once. You start by applying the AEO Risk Score strictly to your priority. Clusters the topics that drive the most revenue or carry the most regulatory risk.
Find the bleeding neck, basically.
Yeah, you find your lowest scoring high-value pages and fix those first.
The immediate next step is to introduce the risk tags.
Yeah.
From today forward, tag every new piece of content as low, medium, or high risk so you can implement that fast-track approval process. Don't let new content clog the pipeline.
Yep.
And for a quick win, go to your top 20 existing pages, the ones driving the vast majority of your traffic, and simply add boundaries. Inject phrases like, "this changes when," into the existing paragraphs to build those guardrails.
It is entirely about building a routine of truth maintenance.
Huh.
The era of set-it-and-forget-it publishing is just over. You have to actively curate the information you want the machines to read.
So to summarize, the ultimate takeaway from the source material is really profound. The safest brands become the most citable brands because they publish clear, bounded, maintained truth. In the old days of the internet, you could win by being the loudest, the most hyperbolic, or just publishing the highest volume of content.
Right.
But in an answer engine world, vagueness and unbounded claims are literally penalized by the architecture of the machines themselves.
Which leads to a really fascinating, broader implication for all of this. If artificial intelligence answer engines naturally gravitate toward highly bounded, nuanced, and structurally safe content in order to avoid their own liability, how is this going to shift the overall tone of the internet over the next decade?
Oh, wow. That is a wild thought. I mean, we've spent the last 15 years living in a digital ecosystem driven by clickbait, absolute claims, and manufactured outrage because that's what drove human clicks. But if machines are the ones doing the reading and the summarizing now, and they demand clear guardrails and safe parameters to function, are we about to see the era of hyperbole replaced by an era of radical, cautious precision?
It's entirely possible that the algorithms we feared would spread misinformation might actually force brands to communicate more responsibly than they ever have before.
What a concept to leave on. The idea that to win the algorithm, you actually have to be honest about your limitations. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take a look at your own sources, evaluate your own brand's content with this new lens, and ask yourself, what is your blast radius? We'll catch you next time.